Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the integration of philosophy with other disciplines. So, philosophy, as we know, is a second order discipline versus a first order discipline. By first order discipline, I mean disciplines that interact directly with the data and the subject matter that they study. So, for example, biology studies living organisms. Logy is the study means the study of, and then whatever comes before that is the thing that they're studying. So bio means life. So biology is the study of life. So these disciplines uh, study and have direct access to the data and to the subject that they're studying. Philosophy, however, is a step behind that, or maybe a step below it, however you want to think about it, and it studies the disciplines that study the subjects. So if biology studies living organisms, then philosophy studies biology. This is good because it helps keep things in check, and it helps keep the disciplines from overextending themselves and dealing in areas where they're not prepared to deal with. So biology study is the study of life, the study of living things, and it basically says, okay, give me everything you have that's living, and I'm going to study that. I'm going to collect data. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to categorize it. I'm going to build a body of knowledge about that thing. So it may ask a question like, what are the divisions of cellular respiration? Now, philosophy, though, asks questions before that, or behind that, or maybe underneath that. Questions like, what is life? Is it morally permissible to experiment on living things? How should someone form scientific theories? These are all things that biology doesn't deal with directly because that's not the study of living things, right? But that does these the answer to these questions very much does affect how biology works and how biology does the job that it does do. And so it would be, and also conversely, it would be outside the bounds of biology to ask questions like, what is life? That's not inside the study of biology. Biology just says, all of the living things, I'm going to study those things. Okay. It doesn't claim to determine what life is. It just studies those things that are living. So if the discipline of biology begins to overextend itself into defining what life is, into defining if it's morally permissible to experiment on living things, then we see how the discipline has overextended itself into areas where it's not prepared to deal with. It doesn't have the information to deal with it, and also it's not. That's not what it's meant for. That's not its job. Its job is to be a tool to examine living things. Okay, so philosophy helps keep things in check because philosophy asks those questions and informs biology, and then biology can go and do its task better. Here's some other examples to help kind of solidify this concept. So let's take psychology, right? Psychology is the study of human development, and would ask a question like, what are the levels of human cognitive development, right? Like the development of stages of learning, stages of how your brain develops into ways that you can actually think and learn things. What are those levels? That would be something that would lie very firmly within the jurisdiction and the purview of psychology. But philosophy would ask questions a little bit deeper than that, or a little bit more underneath that. Like, for example, what does it mean, or what does it mean to know things, or is it possible to know things? Or possibly, at what point in their cognitive development is somebody morally responsible? Okay, now look, psychology doesn't ask questions. It doesn't determine when somebody is morally responsible. They tell us that at which stage that a person understands responsibility, that a person understands culpability, that a person has is a free agent over their own thoughts. I mean, psychology maybe could tell us that, but philosophy tells us when someone is morally responsible. Philosophy tells us what it means to know something. Psychology will tell us at what level and to what depth somebody knows something at any given point in their life. Okay, let's take English, for example, the study of English. English may study things like and be able to answer questions like what is a complete sentence, or possibly how many couplets are in a sonnet. But philosophy will ask questions like what is language at all, right? To begin with, what is communication? What is that? How do we do that? What does that involve? What is its relationship? What is communication's relationship to language? What is language's relationship to specific languages like English or German or Japanese? Philosophy may also ask what is beauty, because there's some aesthetic value to writing that's beyond just communicative value. And philosophy will ask, what is that? What is beauty? And then English will tell us, well, okay, in English, this is beautiful. Okay, so you see how philosophy asks questions that are kind of underneath or maybe prior to questions that these other disciplines that deal directly with the data ask. And that's why philosophy is called a second order discipline, because it's underneath these disciplines and it helps them do their job, and also helps keep them in check and keep them from overextending themselves into areas where they're just not prepared to ask, and they're not meant to. That's just not inside the boundaries of what these disciplines are meant to do. However, it is exactly what philosophy is supposed to do. Okay, some major divisions in this discipline of philosophy. Ethics, which might be one of the most familiar. It is the study of what morality is, and then the examination of different theories of what is good and bad and how we make those determinations. Metaphysics is the study of being or reality. The word literally means above or beyond the physical. And so here we study things that are not, the nature of things that are not physical. If we can know them, how they might behave, we might study things like causes and effects, relational properties, that type of thing. We also talk a lot about souls in that particular section. Epistemology is the study of how we can know things, or how we know what we know. It seems likely that we do know some things. That just seems to be the case, that we know things. But what does that exactly mean, that we know something? What does it mean when we don't know something, when we're learning something? And how do we know when and how we know it? And logic is the study of the proper way to think, or rules for proper reasoning, which is interesting because this does assume that there are proper ways to think. There are more correct ways and less correct ways to think. Logic helps us order thoughts and also helps us build a powerful argument. So let's discuss briefly what philosophy proper is not. Now, I say proper, philosophy proper, which is important because philosophy proper is the discipline, right? Philosophy in general, like you could have a philosophy, you could have a worldview, you could have a way of looking at the world, but philosophy proper is not is not your worldview. Philosophy proper is what we just talked about, is a discipline, and it involves several different branches. It has its own vocabulary, that sort of thing. So philosophy proper is not, by way of reminder, your own personal view of the world or your worldview. For example, I think God is big enough to save all people, therefore everyone is going to heaven when they die. I mean, although that might be a nice thought, and that might be the way that you see the world, that's not philosophy as a discipline. That's your philosophy, but that's not philosophy as a discipline. Another example, I think that there's a little bit of good in everyone, therefore everyone is a good person deep down. Again, your philosophy, and it probably does guide your behavior, but not necessarily. It may match with a lot of other people's philosophy. It may even match with a theory that we examine, especially in ethics, but that's not, it doesn't mean that it's philosophy, the discipline. Okay. And then another one, I would think it would be cool if Bigfoot existed. Therefore, Bigfoot exists. again, this is maybe the way that you see the world, but it is a philosophy that evidently this person lives by, but it's not philosophy proper. Real briefly, just some big names so that you can see kind of some of the big pillars. I think it's interesting to note, we kind of know these names, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. If you want to remember their order, just remember that when you line them up, it spells the word spa, and that's the order they come in. And it's interesting to note that all of them are or the second two are students of the one before them. So Plato was the student of Socrates, and Aristotle was the student of Plato as well. Interesting note on Aristotle, he became the mentor to King Philip, who had a really famous son named Alexander, later Alexander the Great. So we see how philosophy, and especially Greek philosophy, which these guys were all Greek, was kind of the seat of Western thought, and it also had a huge impact because, as we know from Alexander the Great, part of what made him so successful was that he spread not only just military power, but actual cultural power throughout his empire by transplanting Greek people everywhere that he conquered, so that the spread of Greek culture, which includes, of course, the Greek worldview, Greek philosophy, Greek ways of thinking, that spread that culture as well, along with just his military borders. So big impact on the world, especially on the Western world. If you have any questions about this lecture or anything else in your readings, please feel free to give me a call or an email.